When you watch them and get a sense of how they really behave, you'll see why these top 4 February lures are so effective. You don't have a lot of extra time. Making the most of your time in the water is so important. These lures are masters of this. Now, number 1 is a change from my list last year. While I still love lipless cranks right now, I have replaced that one with a hair jig. And the real reason I did this is because so much of the country had a major winter blast that reached farther south than it often does. That type of Arctic freeze can be devastating, keeping water temperatures lower for longer, and many bass may still be in that very lethargic state and bunched up at or near the bottom of the water column, when an extremely lifelike and finesse presentation is needed. A hair jig is hard to beat. The skirt material absolutely looks alive. It can be held motionless, or what we think is motionless by us, yet that lure still pulsates and looks so lifelike. The other nice thing is a hair jig bite is often just the rod loading up. I can't wait to show you some underwater comparisons I did with number 4 on my list, but on to number 2, and that is a jig. This is a great big fish lure and an excellent crawdad imitator. However, look at this difference in skirt material. If you can find them, I like a living rubber jig. I've done side-by-side comparisons underwater in the past with living rubber skirt material versus regular silicone skirts, and I feel that living rubber stands out from the jig head better and looks more lifelike in cold water. A huge benefit of this, when worked slower, it doesn't take much movement from us or natural movements in the water column to bring this jig to life. Yes, absolutely, silicone skirt material is still going to catch you a bunch of bass, but I have a lot of confidence in how the living rubber material looks, and having confidence in a lure definitely helps me to mentally fish better through some tough February conditions. Links to everything can be found down below. Now, number 3 is one you hear about all the time, but we're going to actually see why and talk about the impact. And that's a flat-sided crankbait. In cold water, it has that tighter wobble that you are familiar with. You will hear things like more subtle, tighter wiggle, etc. However, I think this fact about bass biology will help you wrap your head around why that tighter, less aggressive wiggle is important. For every drop of 18 degrees Fahrenheit in body temperature, a bass's metabolic rate is reduced to 1/3 its previous rate. That's insane. Look at these bass here. These are February bass where I live in northern Illinois. They look like they're swimming in slow motion. In other words, when bass do eat, they need something easy with a high probability of success. A tighter wiggle doesn't come off as lively or healthy as or energetic as prey with a bigger, wider, more aggressive behavior. Number 4 this time of year for me is going to be a toss-up between the hard suspending jerkbait and a smaller, more subtle minnow lure. And these smaller minnow lures can either be something like a jig minnow, which is so popular right now, or it can be a spy bait. A few years ago, spy baits were all over and talked about constantly. They've kind of taken a back seat. With a hard suspender in these cold waters, you'll want to mix in some less aggressive twitches or even more of a straight pull at times, basically following along with the same thought process for those flat-sided lures. Easy meal, easy to catch, high success rate. Now here's the jig minnow suspended much like the hair jig, extremely subtle, and meets all those criteria of being easy to catch. And here's the spy bait. Once again, a subtle side-to-side roll that is dynamite on cold water bass. But no matter which of these 3 you choose, the real key is to stay slightly above the bass if you can. Their depth may vary from day to day. Keeping that lure just above them seems to be the key to getting bites. So play around with depth until you get things dialed in. Hey, go ahead and drop your favorite February lures below. And if you want to watch that video on my 2 favorite jig minnow retrieves, go ahead and check this one out right here. And make sure that you go out and encourage someone today. You never know how you might just change their life. For the Bass Fishing Life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.